You're coming with me. The loner rancher said it like a verdict, like thunder, spoken low. A woman knelt in the dust with her hair hacked ragged and her face blackened by stove ash. While the family that should have guarded her laughed. Steel flashed, voices cut. Shame burned hotter than noon sun. Then his shadow fell over them, broad hat trail coat, a man the town called merciless with cattle and merciful with the weak. He didn't ask. He took hold of the moment and pulled it open like a door. Follow this story to the end and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from, so I'll know how far this fire travels and who hears it when the night gets loud. The laughter started thin and high, then sharpened until it sounded like tin sheeting torn edge to edge. It rolled across the yard of the gray place and slid beneath the porch boards under the dog's belly through the slats of the fence where 3 hens watched with round, indifferent eyes. The women had Clara Gray by the wrists. They were not strangers. They were family by law, if not by love, and they had the righteous heat of mean spirits doing what they'd convinced themselves was holy. Hold her, Ruth hissed. She was broad in the jaw, neat in the way she pinned her hair, cruel in the way she never raised her voice. Cruelty didn't need volume, it needed certainty. Clara didn't fight. She had learned the cost of fighting. The first time she'd argued, they took her supper. The second time, they took her shoes in winter. The third, they took the skin from her knuckles with a switch. After that, the words stayed inside her and soured like milk left on a windowsill. Cold flashed. Not a razor, not even scissors of any decency, just the dull shears kept for sheep and for punishment. A hand wound into her hair, yanked her head back until her eyes watered and the blades gnawed. It sounded like rope fraying. Tufts fell to the hard pan, her mother's careful braid undone at last, years of patience and pride scattered into grit. Make her plain, Ruth said. Plain enough to remember, plain enough to stop the looking. She was never much to look at. Another woman smirked, but her voice wobbled. It's a strange thing hurting someone who won't lift a hand. It makes even a bully feel a little cold in the stomach. Ash next. Fingers dipped in soot. A child's game-turned weapon. They painted Clara's cheeks with black streaks, pressed thumbprints down her throat. She could smell the stove, the burnt fat, the old wood, the iron warping in heat. They made a mask of her, a carnival of shame, and they did it in daylight. On your knees, Ruth said, though Clara was already there. Someone snorted. Someone said, if Reuben could see you, he couldn't. Reuben had been dead nearly 2 years. A mule stumbled under timber, a bad angle, a neck broken so cleanly the doctor said it was almost kind. Death is a fast teacher. The living learn slower. They learn to need someone to blame. Clara tasted ash. She didn't spit. You spit, you get dragged. You get your mouth pried open and your teeth counted like coins. She held the filthy taste, swallowed it, felt it hit the place below her heart, where fear lived and multiplied. The door banged open. Boots on boards. Men watching, not helping. That was the way of it. Men who stood far enough back to say later they hadn't been part of it at all. Women's business, they'd shrug, though their eyes shone the way eyes do when wolves circle. Enough, one of them murmured, but only after the shears went through again. It might have gone on until someone grew bored. Cruelty tires the arm before it tires the appetite. But the land itself changed. The air thinned. Even the hens lifted their heads. Hoofbeats. A single horse not hurrying. No man late for pleasure or pressed by fear rides that way. He rode as if time kept pace with him, not the other way around. He came out of the glare where the dusty road bent tall in the saddle, a black gelding under him, dust like a second coat across his hat and shoulders. Eli Mercer, a name the town used with respect when it liked him, and with caution when it didn't. He ran cattle alone, mended his own fences, buried his own dead. Folks said he was the kind of man who never asked for help because he didn't ask at all. He saw everything in one sweep, the hair in the dirt, the ash on Clara's face, the way Ruth held the shears like a trophy. His jaw didn't move. His eyes did. He dismounted in a spill of quiet leather and set the reins over the hitch, with a hand that looked like it had learned the shape of work at 12 and never forgot. He walked through the space where men were not standing, because men are careful not to stand in the way of a person who looks like that. Eli, one of them, said, false friendly. This ain't your coming with me, he said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask Clara for permission she had not been allowed to own for years. He spoke into the air the way a man speaks when a horse has spooked and you are reminding it of the order of things. The order had changed and he had appointed it so. Ruth's mouth curled. She belongs to us, by law. Then the law's wrong, Eli answered. Widows stay with kin a man tried. It's... Eli's eyes slid over him, and the man's words tripped on the ground between his boots and fell quiet. Clara lifted her head. It felt like lifting an anvil. She saw him, really saw him. Not just a shape, not just a wide set of shoulders. She saw the lines at the corners of his eyes, the nick on his cheekbone, the pale place at his throat where a scarf usually sat to keep the sun from carving a man into jerky. His face was not soft. His face said, "You're not the first hard thing I've looked at today, and I'm not going to blink now." He stepped close enough to smell what they'd done to her, close enough to see the uneven hack of hair. He took off his neckerchief, a triangle of red faded down to salmon, and shook it once. His hands were gentle as he set it around her shoulders, covering the torn collar. The cloth was warm from his neck. It shocked her that small heat the way a cup of coffee will break a fast in your chest. "Stand," he said. Her legs wobbled. Ruth's fingers tightened on her wrist as if to remind her whose permission she lived on. Eli looked at the hand on Clara's skin and then at Ruth. He did not touch Ruth. He did not need to. She let go. Clara's knees found the ground again, even as she tried to rise, and Eli was there lifting her with a strength that did not show off. He didn't grunt. He didn't make a scene of it. He just stood her up the way you set a post straight when the wind has worked it crooked. "You can't take her," Ruth said, and now her voice had found its volume. She stole. She slacked. She shamed. "Prove it," Eli said. Silence moved across the porch like shade. Proof wasn't the point, punishment was. Everyone knew it. Saying it out loud would have been vulgar. Eli put his body between Clara and the house. It felt like stepping behind a wall that hadn't been there a moment ago. She could still hear them. She could still smell ash. But she was looking at the back of a man's coat instead of the mouth of a woman's rage, and that changes the air a person can breathe. "Mount," he told her again, and the word had its own weather. The gelding turned his head at Eli's whistle. Eli lifted Clara one arm under her knees, one behind her back, and set her in the saddle. She made a sound that might have been a thanks if the word hadn't worn thin from disuse. He swung up behind her, collected the reins in one hand, and touched his heels to the horse's side. "Eli," Ruth shouted, and this time it wasn't bravado, it was the crack of a whip when the hand knows it's missed. "She's ours." "No," he said, and the gelding moved. Not anymore. The yard stretched into road, the road into open. Behind them voices rose and fell. A man called something about the sheriff that sounded brave in the mouth and faint in the air. No one followed. There are some lines a person won't cross in front of others, and Eli Mercer owning the middle of a road was one of them. Cold bit at Clara's face. The neckerchief was a small guard, but it felt like armor all the same. Her hands found the swell of the saddle. Her fingers found the stitches where leather had been mended and mended again. She counted them like beads 1, 2, 3, until her breath lined up with the horse's steps. They rode past the feed store where a sign banged in the wind and a boy stopped sweeping to gape. They rode past the blacksmith whose hammer paused mid-swing and then came down on iron as if the sound itself could say amen. They rode out where fences thinned and sage took over, where the land opened itself the way a chest opens when a man has been holding his breath too long. Clara did not speak. Words were heavy. They bruise a mouth used to silence. But the weight inside her, that brick of fear, shifted a little, as if someone had reached in and moved it to a place that didn't grind so hard against bone. After a while, minutes or miles, she couldn't tell, Eli said, "Name." She thought he was asking for the horses. That seemed easier. But the quiet waited the way a question waits, and she heard herself answer, "Clara." "Clara," he repeated. Not like a judge reading a docket. Not like a man tasting a fruit he's not sure about. He said it like a thing that would not be lost now that he'd caught it. He didn't ask other questions. Not the ones the town would ask. Not the ones the women would be whispering already. What did she do? How did she fail? Why didn't she go home to her people? What does a woman owe once her husband is dust? He rode. The gelding breathed. The world went on turning in that slow, relentless way it has when your life has cracked. and somehow the sky refuses to. They crested a low rise, and there it was, a slant-roof cabin, weathered silver a barn, with a door that didn't quite meet the jamb, a windmill complaining in the wind, a line of cottonwoods tracing the ghost of a creek. A place that had been built hand by hand, day by day. It didn't flash. It didn't brag. It just stood. The horse stopped without being told. Eli swung down, then reached back. She hesitated. It's a strange thing stepping off one life and into another when your boots hit the same dirt. He made the decision for her. Not unkindly, his hands firm under her arms, lifting, setting, as if she weighed less than the decision he had already made. Inside, he said. She looked at the door and saw not a door. She saw a mouth that could swallow her. Houses had not been friendly to her for a long time. Eli didn't push. He walked past, opened the door, and let warmth spill out, a rough hot made of pine and oak coffee and iron. He laid his hat on a peg, moved with the comfort of a man who has had to be his own company and learned how to survive it. Clara's feet took her in. The table was scarred. The bed was straight. The stove was humming. The room was clean in the way a space is when one person has to answer to it at the end of the day and has no one to blame if it goes bad. She stood with her back to the wall as if walls can grow teeth. Eli pulled his neckerchief free from her shoulders, folded it once, set it on the table, then reached for a basin, a pitcher, a clean rag. He poured water and held the rag out. He didn't touch her face. He didn't say wash that off. He offered, and the offer was the first human-sized thing anyone had given her in months. Her fingers closed over cloth. She dipped it, wrung it, lifted it. The first pass across her cheek stung. The second pulled gray into the water. She watched a version of herself swirl and thin. When the basin had gone black at the edges, she stopped. He nodded once, approval without pride. Sit, he said, and she did, because there are orders and there are mercies, and sometimes they wear the same coat. He set a pan on the stove and cut thick slices from a slab of pork that smelled like winter could be endured. He put bread on a plate yesterday's hard at the edges, soft at the center, and poured coffee that had gone past bitter into something like medicine. They ate. He didn't talk. Men in her life had loved the sound of their own voices. Eli loved work more. The fire popped. When she had finished enough to feel the blood come back to her hands and feet, he stood and unrolled a bedroll near the hearth. You take the bed, he said without looking at it, and she understood that whatever his name was in town, whatever stories folks told Loner Sternhard, he knew something about honor. I can sleep on the floor, she said, because old rules don't die easy. You can, he said, and the corner of his mouth did something like a smile that didn't show teeth. You won't. The windmill's blades ticked, the land sighed. She stood cross to the bed, touched the quilt with 2 fingers as if asking permission, then lay down. It didn't swallow her. It held. She watched him through her lashes, the way he checked the rifle by the door, the way he set a chair where he could see both windows and the latch, the way he took off his boots last, as if a man ought to be able to move fast even when he's done for the day. She listened to his breath find even ground. Her hand found the comb she had hidden in her dress, the small silver thing with its mother's pattern of leaves. She slipped it under the pillow. Not gone. Not for show. Safe. She thought then, in that long minute between waking and sleep, that the world had tilted, that humiliation had a horizon, and maybe, just maybe, she had crossed it. If morning came and the door was still unbarred and no voice called her a burden, she would believe it. Not before. But the last thing she knew was the heat of the fire and the shape of a man in a chair who had said, "You're coming with me," and made it sound like a law the land itself meant to obey. Morning on the plains did not arrive in a rush. It crept. A thin line of pale gold touched the rim of the horizon, then spread slow as butter on rough bread. The windmill outside the cabin turned once, twice, creaking like an old throat finding its hymn. Clara opened her eyes to the gray-blue light and the unfamiliar weight of a quilt that smelled faintly of pine smoke instead of mildew. For a moment she did not move. Her body, drilled by months of abuse, waited for the barked command, the yank of her arm, the kick to the ribs. None came. She turned her head. Across the room, Eli sat where he had dozed, one boot propped on the rung of a chair, hat tilted low. His rifle leaned against the wall within easy reach. He hadn't moved in hours except to breathe. She realized then he had given her the bed not out of courtesy alone, but because he trusted his own back against the cold floor more than he trusted her against another night in fear. That trust was not spoken, but it was heavy in the room, heavier than Ruth's scorn had ever been. Clara shifted the quilt, rustling. Eli's head lifted. His eyes were alert before the rest of him even straightened. "You slept?" he said, more observation than question. She nodded. Her throat felt thick. Words didn't always rise easy after silence had been law for so long. "Good." He pushed his hat back. "Coffee's ready," the pot on the stove muttered as if to agree. She sat up, slow fingers combing through the ragged ends of her hair. The mirror on the wall was small, cracked, a remnant of a better store year. In it, she saw herself, cheeks clean now, hair hacked short and uneven. For the first time in months, she thought not of shame, not of what Ruth had taken, but of what remained. The coffee scalded her tongue, but warmed her chest. Eli handed her a mug without ceremony, then went about cutting slices of yesterday's bread, toasting them on the skillet. He wasn't gentle about it, but he wasn't careless either. His movements belonged to a man who did what needed doing and left the rest to wind and rain. Between bites, Clara dared to ask why he glanced at her. One syllable, simple, flat, but it carried the question she had not spoken the night before. Why had he stepped into her humiliation? Why risk the wrath of kin, of town, of law that leaned crooked? "Because it was wrong," he said. She waited for more. There wasn't any. He didn't embellish, he didn't preach. He said it as though the sky were blue, the earth turned, and some things no man with eyes could let stand. Clara lowered her gaze to the bread chewing, though her stomach was tight. Wrong. She'd whispered that word to herself so many times it had lost its edges. Hearing him say it sharpened it again. Eli finished his meal, wiped the skillet clean, then pulled on his coat. "Work to do," he said. He moved toward the door, then paused. "You'll be safe here. Dog'll warn you if anyone comes." As if called, a low woof sounded from beneath the porch. Clara startled. She hadn't noticed the hound in the night, black-old, with one ear torn, but eyes bright as coals. The animal thumped its tail once when Eli opened the door. "Stay!" Eli told the dog. And though the word was for the animal, Clara felt the weight of it on herself too. When the door shut, silence pressed in, broken only by the dog shifting outside and the clock on the wall ticking its slow sermon. She rose, wandered the cabin. The shelves held books, few, but worn corners softened from use. A Bible, a volume of Emerson's essays. A ledger. She ran her fingers over the spines, surprised. Ruth had burned her book, saying learning spoiled a woman's humility. She stopped at the table. The folded neckerchief lay there still. She lifted it, pressed it to her face. It smelled of dust leather, faint sweat, and smoke. The smell of someone who worked, who endured. It was absurd how steady that smell made her feel. She set it down quick, as if caught. The hours dragged. Clara cleaned to keep her hands busy, swept the floor, scrubbed the tin plates, mended a tear in the curtain with thread she found in a box. She half expected Eli to scold her for meddling, but part of her feared he would approve, and approval had become dangerous to crave. By afternoon, the sound of hooves returned. The gelding snorted outside. Eli entered with a sack of flour on his shoulder, a coil of wire in the other hand. Dust streaked his coat. His hair was damp with sweat. "You didn't have to bring flour," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I did," he answered simply, setting it down. He noticed the swept floor, the neat dishes. His eyes flicked once, then he gave a nod. Not a word, but it landed deeper than any thanks she'd heard in years. That night, the routine repeated dinner silence, the crack of firewood. But Clara felt a shift. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was space. Space to think, to let her mind wander without fear of reprisal. She found herself asking, cautious, "How long have you been alone here?" Eli leaned back in his chair, pipe stem between his teeth, though it wasn't lit. "Since my brother died." The words carried the weight of old stone. She didn't ask how. His jaw said not to. She swallowed. "And before I wasn't alone. That was all. No names, no details. But the air grew heavy with absence, like a church after a funeral where the hymns still hang invisible. Clara lay down later with her mind full of questions she couldn't voice. She thought of the way he had looked at Ruth without blinking. She thought of his hands lifting her like she weighed less than sorrow. She thought of his cabin, his hound, his few books. And for the first time in a long time, when she closed her eyes, the dark didn't swarm with voices calling her worthless. The days that followed settled into rhythm. Eli rose before dawn, worked fence lines, tended cattle, chopped wood. Clara kept the cabin cooked what little they had sowed where sowing was needed. At first she did it out of instinct, the way a beaten dog curls when the stick lifts. But soon it became something else, participation, not penance. She began to hum while stirring stew. She caught herself once, hand flying to her mouth, heart pounding as though Ruth might storm in and slap her silent. But no hand came. Eli only glanced up, listened a moment, then went back to repairing a harness. The hum returned the next day a little steadier. On the fourth morning, the knock came. Sharp. Official. Clara froze, spoon clattering against the pot. The hound growled hackles up. Eli crossed the floor, rifle in hand, and opened the door a crack. Sheriff Baines stood there, badge-polished eyes squinting. Behind him, Ruth lips pinched triumph in her stance. "Morning, Mercer," the sheriff said. "Word is you carried off a woman don't belong to you." Eli's voice was flat. "She doesn't belong to anyone." "She's kin to the Grays," Baines said, clearing his throat. "By law, they got claim." Ruth pushed forward, face sharp as a hatchet. "She's lazy, she's wicked, she's ours. Give her back." Clara shrank behind the table, every muscle screaming to disappear. Eli stepped outside, pulling the door nearly shut behind him. Clara pressed to the crack, heart hammering. She could see his shoulders broad and still. "She's under my roof," Eli said. "That's claim enough." Baines shifted uneasy. "Don't make this hard, Eli. The law's the law. The law is men like you," Eli said, "who choose which rules to enforce, depending on whose voice is loudest." Ruth spat at the dirt. "You'll regret crossing me." Eli didn't flinch. "Already have. Don't intend to again." The silence stretched. Baines rubbed his jaw, then tugged Ruth back by the arm. "Not today," he muttered, leading her off. When Eli re-entered, Clara was pale, fists clenched white. "They'll come back," she whispered. "Then let them," he said, setting the rifle down. "They'll find the same answer." Something cracked in her chest then. Not fear, something else. Something like a door she thought had been bricked shut, easing open to air. That night she slept without clutching the comb beneath her pillow. The morning after the sheriff's visit dawned quieter than Clara expected. She had lain awake through much of the night listening for the crunch of boots on the porch or the creak of wagon wheels in the yard. But none came. Only the steady breath of Eli across the room, the hound's sigh beneath the floorboards, and the whisper of wind across the prairie grass. When she rose to tend the fire, Eli was already outside splitting logs. Each strike of his axe rang clear, echoing against the hills, as if to declare to the land itself that he would not bow. Clara stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around her thin frame, watching him. His coat hung open, shirt damp with sweat, despite the chill. Every swing seemed like defiance carved into wood. She stepped back inside, nervous. The sheriff hadn't come for law's sake, he'd come for Ruth's voice. And Ruth's voice never quieted. Clara knew that from years of servitude. If Ruth had set her sights on dragging Clara back, she would not stop. As the day stretched on, Clara busied herself with chores. She kneaded dough-chopped vegetables, even tried her hand at mending one of Eli's worn shirts. Her stitches were uneven, but steadier than she'd thought possible. Each prick of the needle into cloth felt like reclaiming something small, something stolen by years of obedience. When Eli returned from the fields at dusk, he noticed the shirt folded neatly on the chair. He lifted it, ran a thumb over the stitching, then looked at her. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "You did this?" he asked. "Yes," Clara answered, bracing for ridicule. "It'll hold." His tone carried no mockery, just fact. Relief spread through her chest like warm broth. She turned back to the stew, hiding the tremble of her lips. That night they ate in quiet again, but this time the silence wasn't heavy. It was shared. The fire popped. The hound snored, and between those sounds, something unspoken stretched a thread neither dared name yet. But Clara's reprieve was brief. The following morning she heard the sound long before Eli did. Wagons, more than one. The creak of wheels, the jangle of harness, the stomp of horses. She froze at the window, heart slamming in her ribs. Dust plumes rose on the horizon. Ruth had returned and she hadn't come alone. Eli stepped inside just as the first wagon rolled into view. His eyes flicked to Clara, reading her fear. He picked up the rifle from its rest by the door, checked the chamber, then set it down again, not in surrender, but as if weighing when it would truly be needed. "Stay here," he said. "No?" Clara blurted, surprising herself. Her voice shook. "She won't stop. She'll ruin you too." His gaze held hers steady. "I've been ruined before. Stand back." The wagons drew up before the cabin. Ruth climbed down first, her hair pinned tight, her face sharp with victory. Behind her came two men, her brothers thick-armed and smirking, and the sheriff again, hat low, looking wearier this time. Eli Mercer. Ruth called loud enough to rattle the windows. "You got something that belongs to us. We've come to take her back." Eli stepped onto the porch. The hound growled, low teeth bared. Clara clutched the back of a chair, knuckles white. "She doesn't belong to you," Eli said, voice carrying over the yard. "She's my blood," Ruth snapped, "and blood binds stronger than pity." Eli's jaw tightened. Blood means nothing if it spills cruelty. Ruth's brothers shifted hands near their belts. One spat, the other sneered. "Best step aside, Mercer. Ain't worth dying over some broken woman." Clara's breath caught. She had heard those words before, thrown at her like scraps. Broken woman. Worthless. It was the language Ruth had fed into every corner of her life. Eli's voice cut through. "You're right about one thing." He paused, his gaze sweeping over them, unyielding. "She's not worth dying over, but she is worth living for. And she's living here now." The yard went still. Even the wind hushed. Clara's throat closed, tears stinging her eyes. No one had ever spoken of her that way. Not as burden, not as shame, but as reason. The sheriff shifted uneasily. "Eli, you're making this harder than it has to be." "You're the one making it harder," Eli replied, calm as the earth itself. "Law's supposed to protect, not deliver lambs back to wolves." Ruth's lips curled. "You'll pay for this." "Then send me the bill," Eli said, and turned his back, walking inside. It was reckless. It was bold. And it shook Clara's world more than any whip Ruth had ever raised. Inside, Eli shut the door, set the rifle against the wall, and looked at her. "They won't give up easy," he said. Clara swallowed. "Neither will you." For the first time since she'd met him, Eli's mouth curved in the faintest shadow of a smile. "Not for something worth keeping." The wagons lingered outside for an hour. Voices raised threats spat into the wind, but they left without her. When the last wheel creaked away, Clara sat down hard, trembling. She had thought her rescue a moment's mercy. She was beginning to realize it was becoming a battle, and one she wasn't watching from the sidelines anymore. That night, as the firelight flickered over the walls, Clara whispered a truth she hadn't dared before. "I don't want to go back. Even if it kills me, I won't go back." Eli looked at her, the shadow of flame deepening the lines of his face. "Then you won't." The words landed like a brand sealing not just her fate, but his as well. Clara didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the logs, every gust of wind outside made her jump. She kept seeing Ruth's face at the window, her brothers breaking through the door, dragging her back to the life she'd barely escaped. The fire dimmed to embers, shadows crawled across the walls, and still she lay awake listening to Eli's steady breathing on the other side of the room. When dawn finally broke gray and reluctant, she sat up with a start. Her eyes burned from lack of rest. The hound stirred at her movement, wagging its tail softly before curling back into sleep. She envied that simple peace. Eli rose soon after. He pulled on his boots, adjusted his coat, and strapped on the belt that held his revolver. Clara couldn't help staring. He carried himself with a quiet readiness, like a man who expected a fight, but didn't fear it. "They'll be back," she whispered, voice hoarse. "I know. What will you do?" He paused at the door, glancing at her. "What I have to." Then he stepped outside, boots crunching in the snow. Clara stood at the window, watching him walk the fence line. He moved deliberately, checking posts, testing the gate, running a hand along the wood like it might speak to him. It struck her that he wasn't just preparing for Ruth, he was reminding himself of what was his, what he intended to keep. The day stretched on uneventful, but tense. Clara tried to busy herself with chores again, but her hands trembled too much. She dropped a jar, shattering it across the floor. The noise made her flinch, heart hammering. Eli came in at the sound, eyes sweeping the room. "I'm sorry," Clara stammered. "I didn't mean—" "It's just glass," he said simply. He crouched, picking up the larger shards with steady fingers. "Nothing worth breaking yourself over." Something in his tone undid her. She sank into a chair, pressing her hands to her face. For years she had been told every mistake was her fault, every accident proof she was useless. Now this man dismissed it like nothing, like she mattered more than the jar. Later, when the stew simmered on the stove, Eli finally spoke again. "Tell me about them." Clara stiffened. "About who? You know who?" Her throat tightened. She stared into the pot, watching the bubbles rise and burst. "Ruth. She's my husband's sister. Was. My husband's gone now, but she says I still belong. To her. To the family." Eli's brow furrowed. "And you— what do you say?" Her voice broke. "I say I'm tired of belonging to anyone." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full heavy with the weight of her words. Eli leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, studying her as though trying to measure the depth of what she'd just confessed. Finally he said, "Then maybe it's time you stop." The simplicity of it shook her. Stop. As if freedom were something she could choose, not something wrestled from her with fists and scorn. That night Clara dreamed of open fields. She was running, hair flying loose, face lifted to the sky. No one called her name. No one dragged her back. She woke with tears on her cheeks, uncertain whether they were born of hope or despair. The following day brought no wagons, no shouts across the yard, but the tension lingered like storm clouds on the horizon. Clara found herself drawn outside, standing beside Eli as he mended a section of fence. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. He didn't look up. His hands worked steadily, pulling wire taut. "Because someone should have." Clara blinked, throat thickening. And when they come again, he finally met her gaze, eyes as steady as the line he held. "Then I'll still be here." His words rooted themselves in her chest. For so long she had known only shifting ground, only betrayal and retreat. The idea of someone standing firm beside her was almost too much to believe. But that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold and violet, Clara realized something. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like prey waiting for the hunter's return. She felt like someone had drawn a line and dared the world to cross it. She wasn't sure how long it would last, but for now, it was enough to breathe without fear. Still, deep down, Clara knew Ruth. And Ruth was not a woman who accepted defeat. The question wasn't if she would return. It was when and what she would be willing to destroy to reclaim what she thought was hers. And Clara, clutching her ragged hair and scarred hands, understood that this time she would not be hiding behind Eli. This time she would have to stand beside him. Dawn came with frost feathered on the window pane and the faint metallic sigh of the windmill turning as if the night had made it stiff. Clara warmed her hands over the stove door before she dared the pump. When she stepped onto the porch, the boards creaked like old knuckles, and the hound he had spent the evening under there like a shadow with a heartbeat wormed his way out, yawning so wide she could hear the click of teeth. "Morning," she whispered, and the dog thumped his tail against the post. He wore his age proudly, one ear nicked a grizzled muzzle eyes that had learned people and still liked them. "You his or is he his own?" Clara asked when Eli came from the barn hat, already damp with sweat. Eli glanced down. "He's mine when it suits him. Old Bo mostly belongs to the yard." "Bo, then." The name fit. They worked in parallel without speaking much. Eli split wood each strike of the axe, even as a metronome. Clara hauled water, careful to keep the bucket from sloshing arms burning in a way that felt like they were remembering how to hold the weight of a life. She scrubbed the tin plates until the metal showed itself again. She shook out the quilt and watched motes swim in the shaft of cold sun like tiny travelers. The small doing steadied her. She had learned to be invisible in a crowded house. Here, work made her visible in the right way, not a problem, a participant. At mid-morning, Eli led the black gelding out by a short rein. "Shadow needs exercise," he said. "You should learn him proper." Clara froze with the dish towel in her hands. I've ridden, she started, and then remembered she had ridden when men bid her ride. She had never been taught. Eli read the truth in her face. We'll take the flats, he said. No hurry. He studied the raw edge of her hair the way the wind worried it. Hat'll help. Sun's mean around here. He reached up to the nail by the door and took down an old felt, the brim softened by years. He stepped close and set it on her head like it was a crown, 2 fingers adjusting the tilt so it would catch the light and not her eyes. The gesture was simple. It made her throat ache. Outside the fence line, the world widened. Sage brushed their boots with its clean bite. A hawk cut a black thread across the sky and was gone. Eli mounted, then kept the gelding still with knees and voice, while Clara gathered her skirt and found the stirrup. Left foot. Look where you're going. Not at your fear, he said. She swung and nearly lost the saddle, then found its skin burning with the small shame of clumsiness. Eli didn't chuckle. He kept his gaze on the horizon the way a captain watches a line of sea. Hand low. Don't choke the reins. He can feel your worry, he said, voice even. Breathe. He'll match you. She breathed. Shadow's ears cocked back, listening, then forward again. They started at a walk, and Clara learned the count of it 1, 2, 3, 4, a prayer with hoofbeats. Wind threaded her hat brim, lifted the ragged ends of her hair so they skittered at her neck like new grass. She wanted to cry for the feel of movement that wasn't flight. They went as far as the dry creek and back, Eli keeping to her left so the sun would be on him if it bounced off the snow and bit. At the bank, Shadow hesitated, then stepped down like he remembered yesterday and wasn't convinced about today. Eli clicked his tongue twice, and the gelding settled. All the while, Eli watched Clara more than the land, but he did it like checking a fence, you mean to keep a glance a hand, a patience that measured progress, not performance. Halfway home, Clara spoke without planning to. My father used to whistle when he mended harness, she said. Same tune every time, slow at first, then quicker. He said it kept the leather honest. Eli nodded as if this were a thing a man might say. My brother sang off-key loud as sin, he said. Thought if he rousted the notes, they'd obey him. You have a brother, Clara said, though she had known from the way his silence had shaped itself around something missing. Had Eli answered, and when none of the story followed, she did not reach for it. People will hand you their past when they trust you not to break it. They returned to the yard with Shadow blowing steam like a train. Clara slid awkwardly from the saddle and nearly took Eli with her. He steadied her big hands under her elbows. They froze, both of them caught in the shock of contact. She stepped back fast, heat up her neck. Thank you, she said, eyes down. Again tomorrow. He said, eyes not unkind. Inside, the cabin felt less like a borrowed room and more like a place with her thumbprint on it. She took knife to onion eyes, smarting as she made a stew out of nothing special and memory. Bo stationed himself in the doorway like a guard who had discovered the perk of soup bones. Eli came in at dusk, the day's wear carved in dust and sweat on his face, and paused at the smell of onions and fat. He said nothing but that pause and the way his shoulders dropped half an inch were praise enough. They ate. The fire took the edge off the cold. Clara held the spoon with 2 hands so it wouldn't clink against the tin bowl, a habit born of being scolded for small sounds in a house where only some voices had the right to be loud. When she realized what she was doing, she set the spoon down too hard and flinched. Eli's eyes flicked up, then back to his bowl. He left the space around her mistake unfilled. Mercy sometimes looks like not mentioning what a person already knows. After he brought a small tin from a shelf, unscrewed the lid, and set it on the table between them. Salve, he said, nodding at the red marks left by rope and rough hands. Pine and tallow. It'll keep scars from taking root. She touched the balm with a careful finger. The smell of resin rose sharp and clean. It found some place in her that remembered walking through a stand of pines with her father. When she was small, a sweetness so clear it hurt to breathe. She blinked and blinked again until the world steadied. Thank you, she said, the words heavier than the tin. He grunted something that might have been, you're welcome, or might have been. I know, then rose and set another log on the fire. Sparks climbed like stars with no sky to climb into. Later, when the dishes were done and Bo snored like a saw, Eli reached for the ledger on the shelf and paged it open at the table. Columns of numbers, small notes in a neat hand. nails, salt, a calf. Doctoring a hinge from the smith, 2 pounds of coffee he'd allowed himself in a month when the fence had eaten coin. He turned the book so she could see. Supplies, he said. I'll head to town tomorrow. Better to do it before roads go to soup. Clara felt the room change temperature. The word town was a stone in her stomach. She knew those streets. She knew those eyes. You'll go alone, she asked, hating how thin her voice went. You can come, he said, like offering a cup across a table. Or not. Your choice. Choice. It was a strange animal in her mouth, new and wary. She wanted to say yes to test herself against whispers. She wanted to say no and keep this fragile calm another day. The fight between them left her breathless. If I come, she said at last, and they say things, they will, Eli said. No softening, no lie. And then we'll buy nails. She laughed, a startled sound that felt like a bird trapped under her ribs had found a window. He looked mildly pleased with himself, which was to say the lines around his eyes changed by the width of a thread. She slept deeper that night, not because fear had gone, but because resolve had joined it, and the two together made a kind of tired that ends in rest. Before she closed her eyes, she took the small silver comb from beneath her pillow. She turned it in the lamplight, tracing the tiny vines her mother had loved. It had survived hands and fire and spite. It would survive her too. She laid it in the drawer of the bedside table, not hidden now, not displayed, just kept. Morning found the world sheened with ice, the ruts in the road slick as pewter. Eli hitched the wagon early. The gelding didn't like cold iron against his mouth, but took it anyway with a shake that sent steam flaring from his nostrils. Clara wrapped the old felt tight under the braid she had managed from the ragged hair. She stood on the porch and looked at the yard as if memorizing it. If she had to come back fast, she wanted to know it by heart. Eli offered his hand to help her up. She took it. The callus on his palm surprised her more than the warmth. She set herself on the board seat, feet braced, breath small clouds that the air ate. He clicked his tongue and the wheels grumbled into motion. The land unrolled cottonwoods, holding their leaves like coins. No one would spend fence posts marching the creek a dull blade. They rode without talk for the first mile. Then Eli said, "This road's honest." "How do you mean?" she asked. "It shows you its holes," he said. "Town hides them." She thought of Ruth's smooth face, the way she'd sweetened her tone for a sheriff, the way men had stepped just far enough back to keep their hands clean. "Yes," she said. "Town hides them." They passed the ridge where buzzards rode the thermals. A pair of riders stood there for a time, black dots against winter light, then turned their mounts away when the wagon rolled steady on. Clara noticed. Eli noticed too, but he didn't turn his head to follow. "Know who they were?" she asked. "Men with time," he said, which was a way of saying watchful without giving fear a name. They hit the first of the town's outlying shacks before noon. A cooper's a woman with a wash line staked in ice, a boy on a barrel who stared openly until his mother tugged him inside. Clara's stomach went to water. Eli saw it happen like he saw weather. He set his hand on the bench beside hers, not touching, just there to be found if she needed it. She didn't take it. She was glad it was there. The main street was mud over frozen ruts, this season's compromise. Folks moved careful, heads turned. A whisper moved the way prairie fire moves when there's more talk than kindling fast enough. Ruth wasn't in sight. The sheriff wasn't either, but absence, Clara had learned, could be its own kind of presence. Eli drew up before the mercantile. "Nails, flour, lamp oil, coffee," he said, like reciting a creed. "You want anything that's not on the list, speak it." She thought of needles of thread that wasn't tangled and old. She thought of a small bar of soap that smelled like something other than fat. She thought of ribbon. The thought was too tender to risk in public. "Pins," she said, at last. "If they have them." "They do," Eli said. "They just tell women they don't when men are listening." She turned her face so he wouldn't see the way those words landed. Inside the bell above the door clattered. It sounded like a lid dropped on a pot-sharp, startling final. The store smelled of burlap, molasses, iron, and envy. Mr. Keene behind the counter looked from Eli to Clara and found his face trying to be two things at once. He failed and settled on cautious. "Mercer," he said. "Morning." "Wind's a bite today. Seen worse," Eli said. He set the list on the counter, hat brim low. "Fill it." Keen's eyes skittered to Clara. Miss Gray, he tried, though it felt like the honorific had gotten stuck on the way out. Heard you were shopping, Eli said, and the one word put the rest of Keen's sentence back on his tongue where it belonged. Clara stood with her hands clasped hat brim, making a small shelter. She could feel the room taking her measure, the short hair, the clean cheeks, the way she didn't tuck her chin anymore. She felt the old urge to apologize for breathing someone else's air. Eli's shoulder at the edge of her vision steadied her. She filled her lungs and let them empty slow. A woman near the barrels of flour, a stranger not from Ruth's circle, tipped her head. Not a smile. Not quite. But something that said, I see you. The gift of being seen without being judged felt like someone had pressed a warm stone into Clara's cold hands. Keen fetched Nail's lamp oil, coffee, packed in paper that bled brown at the seams. Pins, Eli said, without looking at Clara, and Keen blinked as if the question had come from the stove. Back shelf, Keen muttered. Next to the soap. Two of the small, Eli said. And a bar that smells like something, Lavender, Keen said, skeptical. Fine, Eli said. Clara closed her eyes for a heartbeat. Lavender. She could almost call up her mother's porch June bees fat with it. They were nearly done when the door swung hard and the bell shrieked. Ruth came in with winter on her shoulders and a smile as sharp as a horseshoe nail. Behind her, one of her brothers grinning like a boy who had been dared to spit in church. Look at this, Ruth said lightly, as if admiring a bolt of cloth. The prodigal. Clara's spine went cold. Words stacked at the back of her throat like boxes in a storeroom ready to topple. Eli didn't touch her. He didn't move. He set 2 coins on the counter, slow as a clock. We're leaving, he said. Ruth's smile widened. With my property. The room took a breath it didn't exhale. Keen found a spot on his ledger that needed reading. The woman near the flour looked at her hands. Clara was the one who moved. Not back. Forward half a step enough to put herself not behind Eli, but beside him. I'm not yours, she said. The words came out low, clear. They surprised her with their steadiness. And I'm not a thing to be claimed. Ruth's eyes flashed. The sheriff knows where I live. Eli said so mild it was dangerous. If he wants to swap scripture for sense again, he can find me. He gathered the parcel under one arm and tipped his hat to Keen as if courtesy were a weapon too. Then he turned and steered the space between barrels and stairs like a man who trusted his feet to know the way. Outside, the air hit like truth. Eli loaded the wagon. Clara climbed up on her own. Her hands were shaking hard enough that pins would have spilled if she'd held them. Eli tied the rope off and rested his palm just for a second on the bench between them again. The gesture said, I'm here. It also said, you did it. They rode out the way they'd come, leaving the town to its talk. When the last building fell behind and the prairie opened, Clara let out the breath the mercantile had trapped in her. You stood, Eli said, not looking at her. I thought I'd fall, she admitted. You didn't, he said. And the pride in it was quiet and clean. The road home looked different for being pointed the other direction. The dips were shallower, the climbs were less. Or perhaps that was only the way relief flattens a landscape. A pair of riders watched again from the ridge and shifted away again when Eli's wagon didn't slow. The wind came up and swung the windmill's arms in the distance, as if the yard were waving them back safe. In the cabin later, after oil had been poured and nails stowed, after Beau had licked the lavender soap and sneezed at its pretensions, Clara sat with the small envelope of pins in her palm. She thought of the word belonging and how it had been used against her like a whip. She thought how the same word might be remade across a table where stew steamed and a man read a ledger out loud so she could see the numbers that made the life they were building. Belonging, she thought, is not a claim. It is a choice. And tonight, exhausted and trembling and clean, she chose. Night had closed in heavy pressing against the windows when Clara found herself still awake. The lavender soap, now wrapped in brown paper and placed by the basin, scented the air faintly, as if the very walls of the cabin had taken a breath of something clean and refused to let it go. Eli had gone to bed early, his boots left at the door, his hat set on the peg, the quiet rhythm of his breathing marking the hours. Clara lay staring at the ceiling. The rafters were thick beams dark with smoke stains. In another house she might have feared shadows. Here, the shadows seemed more like shelter. She touched the pins which she'd tucked into her apron pocket and thought of how simple a thing could hold the weight of defiance. Pins, lavender, nails, flower. Each item a small declaration: I live. I decide. But sleep would not come. Her mind circled the mercantile Ruth's voice cutting the air like a whip the way the room had turned away. She had spoken, "I'm not yours." The words still vibrated in her ribs like the echo of a struck bell. She was proud and terrified. The hound stirred beneath the window. His ears twitched, nose working. Then Eli's voice came low from the other room. "You hear it too." Clara sat up, heart tripping. At first she heard nothing. Then the faintest crunch outside the weight of hooves on frozen ruts. Not the easy rhythm of travelers. This was slower, cautious. Eli's steps were soundless on the plank floor. He had his rifle in hand before he reached the window. He looked without moving the curtain, then set the barrel across the sill. His voice came steady as carved stone. 2 riders again, same as earlier. Her stomach turned to water. "Following us, maybe. Or maybe they've got business near here," Eli said, though his tone carried no real belief in coincidence. Clara moved closer to the window but stayed behind the line of the wall. She saw the shadow of horses at the edge of the cottonwoods not coming closer, not leaving. The wind carried no words, but the watching itself was loud. "They want me," she whispered. "They want trouble," Eli answered. He did not lower the rifle. For a long hour the riders stayed. The moonlight caught their outlines, black against white ground. Clara's skin prickled. Eli did not move a sentinel carved from wood and patience. At last the riders turned silhouettes shrinking until they were only part of the dark. Eli didn't relax until even the wind forgot they had been there. "Why?" Clara asked when he stepped back. "Why follow us, Ruth?" She wouldn't come this far." "Ruth don't need to," Eli said. "Some men like coin, others like cause. Some don't need either if they think it'll buy them favor." She pressed her palms together hard. "Then what do we do?" Eli leaned the rifle against the wall, the weight of it making a dull thud. "We wait, and we live, same as every day." He glanced at her eyes, unreadable under shadow. "Fear's a thing they trade in. Best not to give them more of it than they paid for." The words sat heavy and strong in her. She nodded, though the shaking in her bones would not quit. That night sleep finally came, but it was uneasy. She dreamed of riding Shadow again, except the road kept folding back on itself, circling her toward the mercantile door. Ruth's smile waited there, sharp as ever. Clara woke before dawn, slick with sweat, and found Eli already outside chopping wood, as though the night's vigil had been no more than a passing thought. The day broke cold and clear, sun glinting like a blade off the snow. Clara wrapped herself in her shawl and stepped onto the porch. The hound wagged once before settling his muzzle back on his paws, content to let her look at the line of the land. Eli paused mid-swing. "You ride again today?" he asked. She hesitated. Her body ached from yesterday's thighs, sore hands raw. But the idea of letting fear set her back, of letting those riders steal what small ground she had gained, made her straighten. "Yes," she said. They took the same path to the creek. Shadow was easier under her, or perhaps she was easier with herself. Her hands shook less. Her seat found rhythm quicker. She even let the gelding move into a trot for a short stretch, teeth clenched against the jolt. Laughter surprising her throat when she didn't fall. Eli's mouth tugged into something close to a smile. "You'll make a rider yet." She beamed at him, cheeks pink from cold and triumph. "Or Shadow is patient with fools." "Both can be true," he said. When they returned, Clara bent to uncinch the saddle, mimicking Eli's sure movements. Her fingers were clumsy, but determination steadied them. "I'll learn this too," she said. "You will," Eli said, simply handing her the bridle when the time came. "You're not one to sit still." She looked at him, startled by the truth in it. For years she had been told her stillness was survival. Here, stillness felt like a cage she was already breaking. The rest of the day was work mending a split seam on Eli's work shirt, boiling beans with ham bone sweeping dirt that somehow found its way in despite closed doors. Each task was ordinary. Each was also a claim. At dusk, Eli returned from checking the far fence jaw tight. "Tracks," he said, wiping dust from his hat brim. "Not ours." "Fresh." Her chest seized. They came back. Looked. Left, he said. But they'll be back. He didn't add more. He didn't have to. The message was plain. That night Clara sat by the fire pins in her lap lavender soap on the shelf stew, warm in her belly. She thought of the riders of Ruth of the sheriff. Fear prowled her thoughts like a wolf. But alongside it was something else, a thin, stubborn flame that would not go out. She closed her hand over the pins. I'm not yours, she had said, and tomorrow she would have to keep saying it with her hands, her voice, her every breath, until the whole prairie knew it was true. The morning after Eli found the fresh tracks felt thinner, as if the air itself had been stretched tight over bone. Frost limbed the fence wire. The windmill ticked in slow, precise clicks, counting heartbeats. Clara lit the stove and fed it kindling, then stood with her palms to the heat until the sting left her fingers. The lavender soap sat on the shelf where she'd placed it the night before, its clean, stubborn scent braided with smoke. Eli came in from the yard with his hat brim shining wet. He hung his coat on the peg and set a coil of new wire on the table. East line held, he said. North is soft. From last night, Clara asked. He nodded once. They know how to ride without leaving a name. They don't know how to ride without leaving a mark. She poured coffee. He took the cup thumb, rubbing a small circle in the tin as if it were a coin that might change value if warmed. We'll move the lamp, he said, looking toward the window. Folks can read a house too easy after dark. They spent the next hour doing the kind of work that pretends to be ordinary. Eli shifted the chair he used at night so it wasn't a straight shot from the door. He hung the lamp lower away from the glass so a shadow in the window wouldn't make a target of a man's chest. He checked the latch on the back window and showed Clara the trick of lifting it one hair's breadth so it wouldn't squeal if opened in a hurry. None of it was loud. None of it was panic. It was the grammar of a place deciding not to be taken. When the chores turned quiet, stew simmering, wood stacked, Bo snoring in his patch of winter sun. The rattle of a single set of wheels entered the yard. Eli's eyes cut to the door. Bo lifted his head, gave a low woof that wasn't alarmed. Curious. Maybe the way a dog greets a soul it doesn't know yet. A boy swung off a skinny mare and stood on the porch, as if he expected the boards to scold him. Message, he said, voice too big for his ribs. From town. Eli took the folded paper between two fingers like it might stain. He read it once slow. Read it again faster. The little muscle in his jaw made a small movement and then decided against a second. From Ruth, Clara asked, though she didn't need the answer. Words can carry a person's scent even off the page. Family, Eli said, which was another way of saying yes. He handed the boy 2 copper pennies for his trouble and a slice of yesterday's bread, then shut the door with the care a man uses when he doesn't want a house to learn fear. He passed the note across the table. Clara did not want to touch it. She did. Her hands knew the script before her eyes took it in. Stolen goods. Silver and a quilt. Clothes. Shame. Return what is ours. Return who is ours. Sheriff will be called. God will judge. The words were neat, prayerful. The ink had soaked too deep at the tail of ours. Clara's stomach rolled. The silver is my mother's, she said, voice thin. I gave it to Ruth when I married. She said it would be safer with her. Then it's yours, Eli said, and took the paper back before it could burrow deeper. He fed it to the stove. It curled, blackened words writhing, then collapsed into a shape that didn't speak. She'll tell the sheriff, Clara whispered. He already came, Eli said, as if reminding a man that the sun had in fact risen. He can come again. The door opens both ways. She nodded, but heat rose behind her eyes that had nothing to do with the stove. Letters were worse than shouts. Letters made ugly things sound tidy. Eli watched the last corner of ash flicker. If they want to count, I'll help them count, he said. What came with you was what you were wearing, and a small comb in a pocket you thought I did not see. If there's a theft here, it's not one the law punishes. Color flooded her face. I didn't mean to. I hid it because you kept it because it was yours, he said. You don't apologize to me for that. Her throat worked. Gratitude and grief are cousins. Both make the same ache. He crossed to the corner and unlatched a long, low cabinet she hadn't noticed beneath the window. Inside lay oilcloth-wrapped shapes. He unrolled one, not the rifle, which had its own dignity on the wall, but a short old shotgun with a stock worn dark where hands had cupped it. He set it on the table and stepped back as if to show he trusted the distance between them. Clara's breath hitched. "I don't—" "You will," he said. He pushed a small box of shells across the boards, but didn't open it. "You'll learn with it empty. You'll learn it with your hands and without your fear. The fear can come later. It always does." She stared at the gun as if it were a mirror. She saw herself in it, not a woman aiming to kill, but a woman who had run so long she'd forgotten she could stop and face a thing. He showed her, like he showed her how to ride slow with patience that did not praise and did not sting, how the brake action moved, where the safety lived, how the two barrels sat side by side like twin decisions waiting, how to set it down so it would not fall, how to lift it so it would not shake. Her arms trembled at first. He said nothing. The trembling slowed. He set the empty cartridges in her palm so she could feel their weight promise without consequence. He did not touch her hands unless she reached for his. Again he said, "She did. Again. Again." The movement found a groove, which is what practice makes in a person as rain makes in earth. After a time he took the gun, broke it, and set it aside. Enough, he said, as if to protect her from a kind of muscle that overgrows if fed too quick. They went out to the yard. The day had thawed at the edges. Snowmelt whispered under the thin ice on the creek, shy and secret. Eli led her to the cottonwoods where the ground rose just enough to see the road. He showed her the places a horse leaves more than a print, where a rider shifts in the saddle out of habit, how the mark deepens toward dusk when people lean into going home. "You read land like a letter," she said, thinking of the ink that had claimed to be truth. "Land doesn't lie," he answered. "It only tells you what you miss if you don't look." When the sun slid, they turned back. At the porch, he paused. "You spoke in the store," he said, as if the thought had been walking beside him all afternoon and had finally had enough of not being said. "I did," she answered. Her voice was small and proud at once. "You keep speaking," he said, "even if the room pretends not to hear. If I do, they'll hate me more." "They already do," he replied without malice. "Hating you quiet or hating you loud ends the same for them. It ends different for you." She went inside ahead of him and stood by the table, palms flat on the scarred wood. "I was nobody there," she said. "In Ruth's house, in town. I was a chore someone had to do." Eli's answer was as plain as bread. "You're not a chore here." The words knocked something loose. She felt the ground inside her shift a degree. Not an earthquake. Enough. The afternoon softened. She baked biscuits with a hand that knew too well how to spare flour and still coax hunger into patience. Eli fixed a hinge that had squealed its complaint too long without a proper hearing. Bo dreamed with his feet twitching, chasing some rabbit his nose loved. Ordinary things danger's enemy, and sometimes its bait. Near evening, a hawk's shadow skated across the yard, then broke into 4 smaller shadows that were not birds at all. Riders again cresting the far ridge and stopping clean as if the earth had put up a sign. Not one hoof farther. Eli's shoulders rolled once. He didn't reach for the rifle. He didn't pretend not to see. He looked, then left them to be looked at. "Supper," he said. "They can watch us eat." So they did. He poured coffee. She passed him a plate. The riders sat their horses a long time and took nothing from it except the cold. They turned their animals toward town before the dark had enough teeth to make fools of men. After dishes, after the last biscuit wrapped. For morning, after the lamp's wick was turned down to a bead of flame, Eli went to the door and stood with his hand on the latch. "You want the door open or shut?" he asked. The question surprised her. In Ruth's house, doors had been shut for her and opened for others. Her wishes were drafts to be stuffed or invited as it suited. The idea that a door might answer to her lips made her feel tall and frightened in the same breath. "Open," she said. She swallowed. "A little." He said it the way she asked, an inch that offered light to the bedroom and a path for her voice if she needed it. When he lay down on his bedroll, his face turned toward that gap like a guard would position himself in a passage the enemy might choose. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and took the small silver comb from the drawer. She turned it in the lamplight, watched it strike a line of brightness that slid across her palm and climbed the baseboard. She lifted it toward her hair, then stopped. Not yet. The day would come when she'd wear it, and not feel the weight of what had been done to her riding on its teeth. Tonight she laid it on the table openly, not hidden, not displayed as a dare, simply there, a witness. Before she blew the lamp, she crossed to the window and looked at the night. A chill leaked in along the frame. Somewhere out on the dark plain, an owl stitched the air to itself with its low hoo. She thought of the letters ashes in the stove. She thought of the shotgun's quiet hinge. She thought of Eli's voice in the store when he said shopping as if it were law. "I will not go back," she said, not loud, not to anyone who could answer. Then she lay down and let the line of the door's light fall across her hands like a blessing and a promise both. In the small hours when even Beau's dreams had grown thin, a coyote yipped far off. Eli's bedroll creaked. He rose, went to the window, stood a moment, then returned to the floor. Clara did not fully wake. She floated on the edge where fear can be seen and named and put back. Her last thought before the dark took her whole was simple, and she let herself believe it. I am here, and I am not alone. The winter sun climbed slow, pale as watered milk, and filled the kitchen with a light that felt tired before it even reached the table. Clara stirred the embers, fed the stove, and listened to the house settle as though it were breathing around her. Eli had been gone since dawn, riding the north boundary, where he swore the ground was soft. The words carried weight. She understood now they meant men had come too close in the night. Beau waited by the door, ears pricked, tail sweeping once in a while when he thought the hoofbeats might come. They didn't. The stillness pressed heavy, broken only by the creak of rafters and the crackle of fire. Clara kneaded dough on the floured table palms, working in circles, the rhythm steadying her thoughts. With each push, she tried to press away Ruth's words, the neat ink that had called her a thief, a shame. She had thought those letters would rot inside her forever. Now here in Eli's kitchen, she could burn them. But the smoke lingered. When Eli finally returned his coat, frosted his jaw, shadowed with cold, she read his face before he spoke. 3 sets of tracks, he said, tugging off his gloves. East Ridge, they came close enough to smell our fire. Then turned back. She steadied her voice. Do you think they'll try again? His eyes narrowed, not at her, but at the air between them, as if gauging distance. They will. Men like that don't turn once. They circle. He sat rubbing warmth into his hands, then looked at her. Did you sleep? Some, she admitted, with the door open like I asked. A small grunt of approval. Then it was the right way. Later that morning, he led her outside into the brittle light. The snow had crusted over, breaking beneath their boots with sharp reports like gunshots. Eli carried the shotgun barrels empty and handed it to her once they reached the cottonwoods. Hold it as if it belongs to you, he said. Not borrowed, not begged. Yours. Her hand shook, but less than the day before. She lifted it, sighted down the barrels, let the cold air bite her cheeks. He corrected her stance with words only never touch. Feet apart. Elbow soft, not locked. Don't force it. She exhaled and felt the gun steady. Something shifted inside her chest. Fear didn't vanish, but it found a place to sit that wasn't in her throat. When he took the shotgun back, she felt lighter, almost unwilling to let go. He noticed, though, he said nothing. The afternoon brought riders again. Far across the ridge, silhouettes against the snow, 3 this time, maybe the same ones who had circled before. They didn't approach. They sat their horses, a black punctuation on the horizon. Clara froze in the doorway. Eli only said, "Let them look." She watched his calm profile, the line of his jaw cut by the pale sun. "You're not afraid." His answer came slow. "Fear's a tool, same as a hammer. You use it or it uses you." When the riders turned and vanished back toward town, Clara let her lungs empty. Her knees weakened. She caught the doorframe. Eli's hand hovered near her shoulder but didn't touch. "Stand," he said gently. "You need to know you can." That evening, Ruth returned, not in flesh, but in words again. Another note delivered by the same boy. Eli read it first, eyes hard, then passed it over. "We will speak to the sheriff. Return before worse is said of you. No woman who runs can remain clean. Think of your soul." Clara's mouth went dry. "She means to ruin me. She already tried," Eli said, tossing the note into the stove without ceremony. "And she failed. But the sheriff, The sheriff knows me. Eli cut in tone even. Knows this land. If he comes, he'll come slow, and if he asks, you'll speak, not hide. The thought made her shiver. Yet when she glanced at the silver comb on the table, no longer hidden, she felt a flicker of defiance. Perhaps she could speak. Perhaps silence had been the heavier burden all along. That night the wind rose. It battered the shutters, whistled down the chimney, clawed through cracks in the logs. Clara lay awake, eyes on the inch-wide strip of light from the open door. Eli moved once in the dark, adjusting his bedroll, and said nothing, but the presence of him steady as the earth anchored her. Toward morning, she dreamed of Ruth's house doors locked. Windows curtained, whispers rising like smoke. But when she woke, she smelled biscuits and coffee, heard Eli humming low and tuneless at the stove. The nightmare receded like fog burned off by daylight. Eat, he said, simply sliding a plate toward her. You'll need your strength. For what she asked. For tomorrow, he answered, and his eyes told her he wasn't guessing. He knew. The next day dawned without mercy. The sky was a flat, colorless lid, the kind that pressed down on the prairie until every sound carried twice as far. Clara stepped outside her shawl, wrapped tight, and felt the weight of stillness. Beau's ears twitched, his nose aimed toward the ridge as though he expected something to emerge at any moment. Eli saddled Shadow without a word. Movements efficient, his jaw set. When Clara came closer, he glanced at her hands. You'll ride with me today, not for practice, for need. Her stomach lurched. What do you mean? He tightened the cinch. Tracks at the south fence. Not coyotes. Not deer. Men. Clara's breath caught. Her mind leapt to Ruth, to the letters, to the cold promise she carried in her eyes the last time they'd met. She sent them, maybe Eli said. Or maybe she only lit the match. Men like that don't need much to follow the fire. They rode out together, Shadow's hooves cutting into the brittle snow. Clara clung to the saddle horn, but her back was straighter than the week before. The shotgun lay across Eli's saddle, not hidden. Sunlight caught on the barrels, a flash of warning to anyone watching. At the far pasture, they found the tracks, 3 horses fresh, circling close, then retreating. Clara crouched, touching the indentation with trembling fingers. She felt how near they had been. Her throat tightened. Eli scanned the horizon. They're testing us, seeing how close they can get before I come out. What happens when they stop testing? She asked. He met her eyes. Then we remind them they're not welcome. The word settled into her bones. She straightened, pulling her shawl tighter, and followed him back. By midday, smoke curled above the ridge. Eli stopped his horse, studying the thin column. Camp, he muttered. Too near for comfort. Clara's pulse hammered. Then we should go to the sheriff. His head turned slow and deliberate. The sheriff's 2 days out and 3 questions behind. By the time he comes, it'll be ashes. Ours, not theirs. The reality struck cold. Clara looked at the sky, searching for comfort in its vastness, but it offered none. When they returned, Eli set to sharpening his axe, every stroke measured. Clara baked bread with clumsy hands, the dough rising stubbornly against the chill. She kept glancing at the window, expecting shadows to form. Late afternoon brought hoofbeats again. This time they did not linger at a distance. 3 riders emerged from the cottonwoods, approaching the fence line with boldness that churned Clara's stomach. One lifted a hand, mock-friendly, as if greeting a neighbor. Eli stepped outside, rifle resting casual but ready against his arm. You're on private land, he called, voice even. The leader, a broad man with a red scarf at his neck, grinned. We're just passin', friend. No harm meant. Then keep passin', Eli replied. The man's grin widened. Funny thing we heard tell a woman run off from her kin. Folks worried for her soul. Thought we might lend a hand, bring her home proper. His eyes slid past Eli to Clara standing stiff in the doorway. That her Clara's heart thudded so hard she feared they all could hear it. Eli shifted, blocking their view. She's not yours, nor your business. The man's grin faltered. Everyone's business when a family's name is dirtied. Sheriff will hear. Let him, Eli said. His tone was flat, deadly sure. Now ride. For a tense moment, the riders didn't move. Their horses stamped, breath steaming. Then the leader spat into the snow, turned his mount, and the others followed. They rode off, slow, deliberate, like men making promises without words. Clara's knees buckled once the last shadow vanished. Eli closed the door behind her, jaw rigid. They'll be back, he said quietly. She looked at him, fear and resolve battling in her chest. Then so will we. That night, Clara could not rest. She sat by the fire, the silver comb warm in her palm, the lavender soap scenting the air faintly. Each item had become a shield of sorts, fragile but real. She thought of the writers, Ruth's letters, the sheriff who had yet to appear. And she thought of Eli standing like a wall between her and the world. Outside, the wind carried the faint echo of hooves. Not near, not yet, but enough to remind her that silence never lasted long on the prairie. The days that followed stretched taut, every hour, a string ready to snap. Clara moved through the cabin like someone waiting for a door to burst inward, her ears tuned to the smallest creak or gust. Even the kettle's whistle made her heart jolt. Eli, by contrast, seemed unchanged. He split wood-hauled water and sharpened tools as though danger were merely another chore. His calm steadied her and infuriated her in equal measure. On the third morning, a letter arrived again, this one not carried by a boy but nailed to the fence post with a knife. Eli brought it inside the paper, still trembling from where the wind had caught it. Clara recognized Ruth's sharp, slanted hand before she read a word. "If you will not come, then we will take you. Your shame has gone far enough." The town whispers. A woman who defies her place has no place. Come now, or be dragged. Clara's fingers curled around the paper until it tore. Heat flushed her cheeks, though the room was cold. "She won't stop," she whispered. Eli watched her, unreadable. Then he reached for the fire poker, lifted the lid of the stove, and dropped the letter inside. The flames devoured it, leaving only ash. "She stops when you stop fearing her," he said. Her breath hitched. When she has men to do her bidding." His gaze held hers. "Then we make it clear they ride into teeth, not pasture." That afternoon, he taught her to load the shotgun herself. They stood beneath the bare branches of the cottonwoods, the sky low and gray. His voice was patient, deliberate. "Shells in thumb forward, snap it shut. Don't fumble. Fumbling gets you killed." She obeyed, hands clumsy at first, then steadier with each attempt. The metallic click echoed sharp against the silence. She fired once, the recoil slamming her shoulder. She stumbled, but didn't fall. Smoke curled from the barrels, acrid in her nose, and for a moment she tasted a fierce satisfaction. Eli nodded. "Good. Again." By evening, her arms ached, but she managed to shoulder the gun without trembling. When she set it down, she realized she no longer saw it as something foreign. It had weight like the truth she'd carried all these years, burdensome but hers. That night, as they sat by the fire, Clara dared to speak of Ruth's house. "She used to braid my hair when I was a girl, said I'd thank her for making it neat. Then she pulled too tight, and when I winced, she said, 'Better to hurt now than be ugly later.'" Clara's throat tightened. "I thought she was saving me, but she was only breaking me down to fit her shape." Eli's eyes softened, though he said nothing at first. Finally, he murmured, "Some folks build houses by tearing others apart. Don't mean you need to live in them." The words lodged deep. Clara sat long after he'd gone to his bedroll, staring into the fire, feeling something inside her shift, like ice cracking on a river. The next day, the riders came again. This time, 5 of them bolder, stopping at the fence line. Clara stood just inside the doorway, heart pounding. Eli stepped out, rifle across his arm. "You're crowding close," he called. The leader, the one with the red scarf, grinned wide. "We're looking for a runaway. Family's worried. Figure you've got her tucked away." Eli's tone cut like steel. "She's here by choice, which makes her not runaway but resident. Now leave." The man's grin thinned. "Funny thing about choice. Ain't much for a woman when her name's Dirt. We're here to clean it up." Before Eli could answer, Clara stepped forward. Her knees trembled, but her voice carried. "You tell Ruth she doesn't own me anymore. Not my face, not my name, not my soul. And if she thinks to drag me back, she'll find I'm not the girl she left with a comb and a rope. I'm not afraid." The words shocked her as much as them. Eli's eyes flicked to her, proud but cautious. The riders stared, then laughed, ugly and sharp. The leader tipped his hat mockingly. "Brave words. We'll see how long they last when the night grows cold." They wheeled their horses and rode off, snow spraying from their hooves. When the silence fell again, Clara sagged against the doorframe. Eli caught her elbow before she slipped. "You stood," he said softly. "That matters." She swallowed hard. "But they'll come again." His jaw tightened. "Then we'll be ready." That night the cabin felt both smaller and stronger. Clara lay awake listening to the wind, the shotgun propped within reach. For the first time she believed she might not only endure the storm, but meet it head on. Morning broke with a pale wash of light across the plains, a light that seemed hesitant, as if it too feared what the day would bring. Clara woke to the sound of Eli moving about the cabin, the scrape of boots on wood, the quiet clink of metal. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, rising slowly, and found him at the table oiling the rifle with meticulous care. "They'll come again," he said without looking up. His voice was steady, but the words struck her like a hammer. Clara rubbed at her arms. "I felt it in the night, like the ground itself was waiting." Eli glanced at her, then eyes narrowing in thought. "Fear keeps us awake, but fear also keeps us sharp. Don't waste it." She nodded, though her hands shook as she fetched the kettle. The fire popped as it caught fresh kindling. Bo, restless, paced by the door ears, pricked at every sound beyond the walls. By mid-morning, they were outside. Eli had set up a line of tin cans on the fence post. "You'll shoot until your arms give out," he told her. "Not for fun, for survival." Clara gripped the shotgun. The memory of her last shot lingered in her muscles, the ache deep and bruised, but she raised it again. She fired. The first can toppled, the sound ringing through the stillness. Eli's mouth twitched almost a smile. Again. Hour after hour she practiced missing, often hitting sometimes. Each success tasted sharper than the failure. Sweat dampened her hair despite the cold. Her cheeks burned with wind and resolve. At last Eli called a halt. He took the gun from her, unloaded it, and set it aside. "You're learning." Clara pressed her lips together. "It's not enough." His gaze was steady. "It will be when it has to be." That evening they shared bread and beans in silence, the crackle of the fire filling the room. Clara studied Eli's profile, the scar along his jaw, the lines of endurance etched deep. She wondered what battles had carved him into the man who now stood between her and ruin. Later, as she lay awake, she whispered into the darkness, "Ruth, you won't have me again. Not whole, not broken." The next morning, hoofbeats came early, too early. Clara froze with the kettle in her hands. Eli's head snapped toward the window. He strode outside, rifle in hand, and Clara followed, her shawl clutched tight. 6 riders this time. The leader in his red scarf grinned as if they were old friends. "Mornin', neighbor," he drawled. "You're trespassing," Eli said. His voice carried no tremor. The man's eyes slid to Clara. "We came for her. Make it easy and no one gets hurt." Eli leveled the rifle without hesitation. "She stays." Tension thickened the air. Horses snorted, stamping nervously. Clara's heart pounded so loud she thought it might give her away. Then, as though to test them, one rider nudged his horse forward. Eli cocked the rifle. The metallic click cut the morning in two. The rider froze. The leader's grin faltered just slightly. "Bold of you, rancher, but you can't guard her every hour. When you sleep," Eli's voice snapped like a whip, "then pray I don't wake." The men hesitated, eyes flicking among themselves. At last the leader spat into the dirt, wheeled his horse, and the rest followed. They rode off, but slower this time, turning once to look back, as though promising they would not retreat forever. Clara sagged, relief and dread warring inside her. "They won't stop," she whispered. Eli lowered the rifle, his jaw tight. "Then neither will we." That night Clara dreamed of Ruth's hands again, gripping the scissors, yanking her hair, the sting of shame and cold steel. She woke with tears on her cheeks, but when she reached for the comb Eli had given her, the polished wood calmed her. She ran it through her short hair, each stroke a reminder. I belong to myself now. The prairie wind howled outside, carrying whispers of riders of threats still looming. Yet inside the cabin a fire burned steady, and Clara, though trembling, no longer felt as powerless as she once had. The days bled into one another, each marked by small acts of survival. Clara tended the garden patch behind the cabin, though the frost threatened its stubborn roots. She mended Eli's shirts where the seams had frayed. Eli split wood, checked the fence lines, and set traps near the creek. Life pressed on, but always beneath the surface ran the steady thrum of threat. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the prairie in blood-colored light, Clara sat on the porch, her hands still and empty for once. She stared out at the horizon, feeling the sky press down. Eli joined her, lowering himself into the chair beside hers. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Clara broke the silence. When Ruth cut my hair, she told me it was to strip away vanity. But it wasn't about vanity, it was about control. Her fingers touched the short, uneven strands at her neck. She wanted me to look into the mirror and not know myself, to believe that what she saw was what I was. Eli turned his gaze to her. His voice was low. "And do you believe her still?" Clara shook her head slowly, firmly. "No. I am more than her hands, more than her scissors, more than her cruelty. I may be scarred, but I am not hers anymore." He studied her face, then gave a small nod. "That's the fight, not the one with guns, the one with yourself." The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of Bo growling at the door. She peered out the window and saw smoke curling in the distance. A barn, maybe. Or worse. Her stomach dropped. By noon, news came from a passing rider who stopped for water. He spoke quick, nervous. "There was trouble in town. 2 men beaten, 1 near to death. Folks say it's Ruth's doing. She's riling people up, saying you ran off with another woman's husband." His eyes flicked between Clara and Eli, suspicion and fear mingling. Then he rode off before Eli could question him further. Clara's hands went cold. "She'll burn the whole town just to break me," she whispered. Eli set his jaw. "Let her try. Fire burns both ways." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The cabin walls felt too thin, too fragile against the storm she knew was building. She stepped outside, the night air sharp and clear. Stars spattered the sky, cold and endless. She wrapped her shawl tighter, pressing her back against the logs of the cabin. The silence out here was louder than any scream. Eli followed quietly, leaning on the porch rail. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "I've fought men before. Lost some, won some. But this," he gestured toward her, toward the invisible noose of Ruth's grip. "This is different. It's not just fists or bullets. It's belief. She thinks she owns your story. You have to take it back." Clara swallowed hard. "And if I can't?" He shook his head. "You already are. Every time you stand here instead of there, you're taking it back." For a moment, tears stung her eyes, though she fought them down. She looked at him, really looked at the scars, the quiet steadiness, the weight of solitude in his eyes. "Why are you helping me, Eli? You could have turned me away." He didn't flinch. "Because I know what it feels like to be left with nothing but shame someone else built. And because," he paused, jaw working, "because you remind me of what's worth fighting for." Clara's breath caught. She turned back to the stars, afraid to let him see how deeply the word struck. But something inside her, something long buried, stirred with warmth. The following morning brought new tension. Hoofprints crisscrossed the snow near the fence. Eli crouched, studying them. They came close, too close, watching. Clara hugged herself. Why wait? Because they're planning more than a warning ride. They're waiting for her word. He looked up, meeting her eyes. And when that word comes, it won't be a handful of men. It'll be a storm. Her stomach knotted, but she forced herself to stand straighter. "Then we'll weather it." Eli gave her a long, searching look. "Yes, together." The wind picked up, rattling the bare branches, carrying with it the scent of smoke and far-off voices. Clara felt it then, the truth of his warning. The fight was not behind them. It was gathering like thunder on the horizon. And this time she would not cower. Stormlight has a way of making even honest land look suspicious. The sky that morning wasn't gray so much as bruised, the kind of low, swollen ceiling that made a person duck without meaning to. Wind sniffed around the eaves and then settled as if saving its breath. Clara stood at the basin, face damp, the lavender soap turned slick in her hands. She rinsed, patted dry, and caught her reflection in the glass of the window. Short, uneven hair, a line of new steadiness where her mouth used to live slack with fear. She didn't look unhurt. She looked unafraid. It wasn't the same thing, but it was kin to it. Eli came in from the yard, shoulders dusted with a fine skin of frost that flashed and then melted in the heat of the room. He set his hat on the peg and leaned both hands on the back of a chair like he was bracing himself against more than wood. "They've camped again," he said. No ornament on the words. "Closer." How many? 4, maybe 5, he answered, plus a wagon. Could be supplies. Could be a stage for a speech. Ruth Clara breathed. She didn't mean to say the name out loud, but it rose anyway, sour in her mouth. Maybe Eli said. He walked to the shelf, lifted the small tin of salve, and set it on the table as if the presence of mending things could hold the room together. Sheriff might be with them if she's wanting a show. Clara swallowed. Last time Sheriff Baines had arrived late to conviction and early to convenience, he was a man who liked roads already traveled easier on the horse, easier on the mind. Do we send for him? She asked. He's the kind that shows when talk gets loud, Eli said. We'll hear him coming if he means to be useful. They ate a small breakfast without tasting it. Bo paced the seam between door and wall, a gray ghost with patience wearing thin. When Clara set her cup down, the clink sounded like a signal. Eli's eyes went to the window. She followed his gaze and saw dust smearing the horizon where the road lifted into the cottonwoods. The smear thickened, became shapes, became horses, then men, then the square, self-satisfied block of a wagon with canvas tied back. Here, Eli said. He handed her the shotgun empty, then the box of shells. Not for them. For you. She nodded. Breath thin. I remember. I know you do, he said. Then he opened the door and stepped out into the cold like a man walking onto his own porch, and not a stage set for someone else's judgment. Clara took her place just inside shoulder near the jam, the barrel of the shotgun angled down, the safety on both hands steady. They came on at a walk and stopped just outside the fence as if a line had been drawn in the dirt and called law. The leader in the red scarf was there, his grin roughed up by bad sleep. 2 brothers Clara recognized Ruth's kin, both with the same mean angle at the corner of the mouth. The wagon creaked and there she was, Ruth Gray. Hairpinned so tight you could hear the scalp complain. Shawl folded. Neat eyes bright with a righteousness that could set barns alight and leave the arsonist warm. Beside the wagon rode Sheriff Baines, his badge catching a reluctant splice of sun. Mercer the sheriff called. Morning. Sheriff Eli returned polite as a fence post. You're on my line. Didn't aim to cross it, Baines said, though the horse's hooves had already printed the truth otherwise. He cleared his throat. We come on account of a dispute. Ruth stood the wagon boards complaining under her weight. Not a dispute, a theft. Her eyes slid past Eli, found Clara in the shade of the door. They lit like flint. You. Come down. Clara did not move. She felt the slick of fear try to find her soles to make them slide. They didn't. Her fingers tightened on the wood of the shotgun until the grain bit back. Eli shifted only enough to make his presence wide. She's not yours to summon, he said. Ruth smiled the way a rope smiles when it smells a neck. She's my brother's widow, which makes her mine by duty, if not by delight. The law says a widow's her own person. Baines cut in tired already, as if he'd had this line ready for a morning that came late. Can't claim her like a stray, not anymore. Ruth's head snapped to him. For a heartbeat, the steel in her eyes dimpled with surprise. She recovered fast, then claimed the rest she spat. My silver, my quilt, clothes she took, and the dignity she threw in the dust. Baines looked at Eli. They're a theft. No, Eli said. There's a woman and what's on her back and what was already hers before any Gray put a fork to her table. Ruth barked a laugh. Says the man who stole a wife out from under kin. Clara stepped forward past the jam onto the porch where Winter could find her face. She didn't lift the gun. She didn't have to. Her voice carried. You never wanted my dignity, she said, each syllable clean as cold water. You wanted my obedience. You cut my hair because you like things small. You blacken my face because you like things ashamed. You can keep the silver if it means that much to you. Keep the quilt. Keep the knife you used for both. I won't fight you for objects. I won't come back for chains. Silence leaned hard on the yard. Even the horses seemed to hush. The sheriff's chin dropped a fraction, as if he'd been waiting to see whether her voice could hold its own weight. It did. One of Ruth's brothers spat. Big talk for a woman hid behind another man's gun. Clara didn't flinch. I learned to hide good. You taught me, but I'm done learning your lessons. Eli's mouth did that near smile thing at the corner there and gone. He addressed the sheriff without taking his eyes off the yard. "Any papers say different?" Baines sighed. The breath rose white. "No papers. Nothing that holds up. Only voices, loud ones." He looked at Ruth, and his politeness took on a burr. "Ma'am, you bring me stolen goods, I'll log 'em. You bring me bruises, I'll mark 'em. You bring me gossip, I'll sweep it off my porch." Ruth's face went tight as wire. She pointed at Clara like a judge citing a sinner in a busy church. "You won't always have a man to stand in front of you." "I know," Clara said. "That's why I'm learning to stand in front of myself." Red Scarf shifted in the saddle eyes sliding between the sheriff and the rifle and Clara's quiet posture. He was a man who liked odds. The yard didn't offer him many. "We could come back at night," he said to no one in particular. He meant everyone to hear. Eli's voice went softer. "That's when it was most dangerous." "Try it," he said. "Bo knows your smell now." As if cued, the old dog growled from under the porch. It wasn't much of a sound. It carried more promise than threat, which is a thing even men who pretend not to believe in such reckonings understand. Baines turned his horse. "I've said my piece," he announced. The badge winked once and went dull. "Cross this fence again and I'll call it trespass. Test your courage on another road." Ruth stared at Clara like she could stitch her to the porch with just her eyes. Then she sat down in the wagon and slammed her hand against the sideboard. "Drive." The wheels bit into mud that hadn't known it was thawing until something heavy demanded to move. The riders pivoted, the brashness shaken out of them like dust from a rug. Red Scarf couldn't help himself. He threw one last look, half a promise, half a question he didn't know how to ask. Then they were little men, on little horses, on a big road going away. When the yard was only wind again, Eli did not relax. He stood a moment longer watching the place where they had been, as if memory itself might try one more pass. Only when the wind decided to whistle like it used to, did he set the rifle against the door and turn to Clara. "You all right?" he asked. She let the question sit with her ribs a minute. "I am," she said, surprised to find it true. Her hands shook only a little as she set the shotgun on the table and thumbed the safety safe again. "I thought I'd feel empty when they left. I don't." "What do you feel?" She searched for a word that wouldn't break when she set it down. "Tall," she said at last, and flushed because it sounded childish and exact. "Good," he said, as if tall were a measurement he trusted. He went to the stove, lifted the lid, poked at coals gone sullen. "Rain'll be on us by night," he added, casual as weather. "We'll bring the wood in close tie, the barn door, move the lamp back again." They moved through the long list that keeps a place. Wood dragged, door barred, rope checked where it would hold and where it needed a new knot. Bo inspected each task and signed off with a grunt. The first drop spattered while Clara was still on the porch. It made a dark coin on the step, then another, and then the sky remembered how to be river. Inside the cabin shrank to warmth. The stove ticked as Rainbeat timed its own drum. Eli shrugged out of his coat muscles under cotton drawing lines that told as much country as any map. He hung the coat turned and found Clara watching him with her hands flat on the table as if she needed to feel the tree in it. What he asked not because he minded the looking, but because words sometimes let air into a tight place. "You," she said, and then laughed at herself. You didn't move when she said my name like it was a leash." He tipped his head. "Names aren't ropes. Not if you don't let 'em." "I forgot that," she said. "For a long time." "People help you forget," he replied. "Takes practice to remember." They ate late stew that should have been thin, and somehow was enough bread that gave up its last good crumb to hunger that had earned it. After Eli fetched the ledger and ran a line under the last entry with a pencil, he kept sharp enough to cut. Nails 17, flour 25, oil 2, pins 2, soap 1. He glanced up at her when he wrote the last and didn't look away when he did. She felt the heat rise in her face and didn't apologize for it. When he closed the book, the rain had found its chant. It would keep it through the night. Clara stood cross to the small peg by the bed and lifted the silver comb from where it hung now, not hidden like a secret or held like a weapon, but kept like a story. She ran the teeth through her hair short as it was slow gentle. A few locks caught released. The comb made a faint, clean sound like ice thawing in a glass. Eli watched without staring. "When it grows," he said, voice rough, with a hope he couldn't pretend not to feel it'll catch the light. She smiled and set the comb down as if crowning the table with it. It already does, she said. Thunder wrote its name across the hills. The lamp burned low. They checked the doors again because that's what you do when you have learned what it means to be broken and what it takes to stay whole. You trust and you verify. When Clara lay down, she left the bedroom door open, the width of 2 fingers. It was enough for light and for Eli's breathing to find her and for hers to find him. Sometime after midnight, hoofbeats moved along the ridge and did not stop. Eli rose and stood with the window between his hands, the glass reflecting a small lit oval of his face. He didn't wake her. He didn't need to. She opened her eyes and knew because the old fear rustled in her and then quieted when she remembered the day. Men had come with papers and rope and words arranged like knives. They had left with rain in their collars and the law correcting its posture and a woman's voice hanging in the air after their hoofbeats blew away. Clara closed her eyes again. Her last awake thought was not of Ruth. It was of the word the sheriff had said, not property, not stray, not even widow, which was its own chain in some mouths. Person. She held it. She slept. By morning, the yard would be a slick of mud and promise. The riders would have left more tracks they thought were nothing. Eli would read the road and the fence and the sky the way some men read scripture. She would make coffee strong enough to argue with doubt. And when the day asked again who she belonged to, she would say the only thing that had proven true myself and the life I'm making here. Morning came slow, pried open by rain that still clung stubborn to the shingles and whispered against the glass like someone trying to be let in. The yard was a quilt of puddles and slick mud stitched through with hoofprints that sank deep enough to stay for days. Eli stood on the porch with his coffee tin cup warming one hand, his other resting on the railing like he needed the wood to ground him. He watched the horizon until the line between sky and earth finally admitted to being separate things. Inside, Clara folded the blanket back, listening to the stove's low hiss. She rose quietly, her body still remembering the weight of fear, even though it hadn't visited her in the night. She felt taller, as she had told him, but she also felt the faint soreness that came after standing straight for too long, like muscles learning a new shape. She dressed slowly, every button a small defiance, and came out to him with her hair damp from a quick wash. "Tracks head west," Eli said without turning. "Not back to town, not yet." She moved beside him, following his gaze. The road lay like a scar across the land, ridged and shiny. "Will they circle?" "They might," he admitted, "but not today. Today they lick wounds and try to remember if pride's worth frostbite." Bo nosed his way out, paws muddy, before he even touched ground. He sniffed along the porch, ears sharp, tail stiff. Clara bent to scratch the dog's back, her hand finding the coarse rhythm of his breathing. "He didn't sleep much," she said. "Neither did I," Eli answered. They shared a quiet moment, the kind that would have passed for uneventful in another life, but now held weight. She turned her face up to the drizzle, let the drops mark her skin, and then went back inside to stir the coals and lay bread on the iron plate. The scent rose warm and sure, like proof that ordinary things still claimed the morning. When they ate, Eli spread the ledger on the table again, though not to count nails or soap. He sketched the yard with blunt lines, marking where the fence sagged, where the ditch could serve as cover, where lanterns could be hung to trick the eye. "They'll come back," he said. "Not with the sheriff, but with more men and less patience." Clara studied the crude map. "So we make ready." "Exactly." He tapped the page. "We set rope here. If a horse stumbles, it's chaos before they know what they're fighting." She traced the line with her finger. "I can handle the lanterns. I know where the shadows fall." He nodded, satisfied, and folded the book. For a while they worked in silence, carrying wood, checking the barn latch, cleaning the rifles. The rhythm of labor filled the spaces words couldn't. Clara felt her hands blister against the axe handle, and instead of shame, she felt pride. Pain that built something was different from pain that destroyed. By noon, the rain lightened the sky, pulling open to a pale stripe of sun. Clara went to the stream with buckets, the air sharp with thaw. Her reflection in the water startled her, a woman she barely recognized. Hair rough, jaw firm, shoulders squared. She thought of Ruth's voice, the whip of it, the way it had once bent her without touching. The memory flickered, then dimmed. She filled the buckets and carried them back without stumbling, though the path was slick. Eli met her at the door. "Good weight." She set the buckets down with a splash. "Not heavier than yesterday. Then tomorrow you'll make 2 trips," he said, grinning, just enough for her to catch it before it slipped away. Afternoon shadows stretched long, and the air carried the smell of damp earth and wood smoke. Clara combed her short hair again with the silver comb this time, without fear that someone might tear it away. Each stroke was a small prayer, not for what she had lost, but for what she was making. As dusk fell, Eli lit the lanterns, their glow catching on the wet yard, until it looked almost like gold scattered careless across mud. They ate stew again, richer this time, as if even food wanted to honor survival. Afterward, Eli sat near the door with his rifle laid across his knees while Clara stitched at a tear in her sleeve. The thread pulled tight, neat and firm, her fingers sure. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of trust, the kind that didn't need filling with words. Clara glanced up once, caught his profile against the lamplight, and thought, "This is what home feels like. Not walls, not roofs, but people who don't flinch when the world presses in." When she laid the silver comb down beside her, it gleamed faintly, reflecting the firelight. It no longer looked like a weapon or a relic. It looked like a promise of hair grown back of days lived forward, of dignity, restored not by another's permission, but by her own will. The night deepened. The rain gave up its song. Outside, the land lay quiet, scarred, and stubborn. The tracks on the road would dry by morning, but Clara knew memory lasted longer than mud. And she also knew this when they returned, and she wouldn't stand in shadows again. She would stand where the light touched her face. The next morning broke with a chill that crawled straight through the cracks in the cabin. The wind carried grit, and the scent of smoke faint but real, like someone had banked a fire too far down the road. Clara rose first, stirring the embers until flame leapt back alive. She brewed coffee strong enough to chase ghosts, poured Eli a tin cup, and set a piece of bread to warm. He joined her quietly, his shoulders heavy with sleep, but his eyes already hard at work. "They'll be back soon," he said, his voice gravel deep. Clara didn't ask how he knew. Some truths didn't need evidence, they pressed into the bones. "Then we finish what we started," she replied steady, though her heart gave a hard kick against her ribs. By mid-morning, they set to work. Eli dug shallow trenches at the fence line, camouflaging them with brush. Clara gathered rocks into pails, setting them where they could be thrown or rolled if riders tried the yard. She worked with sleeves rolled high, the muscles in her arms trembling but refusing to quit. The air carried the coppery smell of effort sweat mixed with soil until the land itself seemed to prepare for war alongside them. At noon, Eli wiped his brow and studied her. "You don't shy from it." "Most would." Clara shrugged, breath stilling. "Fear doesn't stop the storm, only makes it worse. Better to move while my legs still hold." He gave a small nod, not of praise, but of recognition, as if her answer matched something he already believed. The afternoon wore long. The sky dimmed under clouds, thick with gray. When Clara paused at the porch to catch her breath, her eyes strayed to the horizon. A shape moved there, small, then larger. A rider. Her blood cooled. Eli saw him too. "Stay back," he ordered, moving to the rifle. But as the figure drew near, the horse slowed, no weapons raised. The rider was a boy, barely grown mud up to his knees, face pale. He pulled up at the gate, chest heaving. "They're coming," he gasped. "Not tonight, but tomorrow at dawn. My pa's with them. Ruth's got him swearing blood debt. But I ain't staying to watch murder." His eyes darted to Clara. "You gotta be ready." Eli stepped forward, steady as stone. "And what do you want in return for this warning?" The boy shook his head. "Nothing. Only don't tell them I came." He turned his horse before either could answer, vanishing down the road like a ghost swallowed by dusk. Clara clutched the doorframe, her nails biting wood. "Tomorrow." Eli closed the gate with a hard slam. "Then tonight we sleep what we can, because come dawn this place won't be ours alone." The evening passed in tight silence. Clara cooked, though neither tasted much. Bo paced restless, growling at shadows. Eli sharpened his knife until sparks leapt. Clara packed a small bundle bread-dried meat, the silver comb, though she wasn't sure if it was for escape or survival. When night came, it carried no comfort. Clara lay awake on her cot, listening to the wind scrape across the shutters. Her mind returned again and again to Ruth, her laugh sharp and cruel the way she had cut hair and flesh with the same hand. The memory no longer froze her, it fueled her. Rage pure and clean warmed her veins. At some uncounted hour, Eli's voice came from the dark. "You're not alone in this." Clara turned her eyes, catching the faint glow of embers that carved his outline against shadow. "I know," she whispered, surprising herself with the truth in it. Silence followed, but it was the kind that steadied rather than haunted. The first hint of dawn stretched pale fingers over the plains. Clara rose before the rooster, her pulse hammering. She pulled on boots, tied her coat close, and gripped the silver comb once before slipping it into her pocket. The short hair it touched no longer carried shame, it carried armor. Eli stood at the window, rifle in hand. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "They're here." And she saw them, two dark dots along the horizon, multiplying, advancing. Riders 10, at least the sun, painting their silhouettes like a wall of shadows on horseback. The sound of hooves rolled across the land thunder without rain. Clara's breath caught, but she didn't retreat. She stepped onto the porch, the boards cold beneath her feet, and squared her shoulders. Behind her, Eli chambered around with calm that steadied even her. This was no longer Ruth's stage. This was theirs. The storm had come, and they would meet it face first. The riders fanned out as they neared their silhouettes, hardening into men with rifles across their saddles and cruelty across their faces. The lead horse carried Ruth perched high, her mouth twisted into something colder than the steel at her belt. Her hair was tied back tight, but the wind pulled strands free, snapping them like whips against her cheeks. She looked at the cabin as if it were prey, as if Clara inside were already broken again. Clara stood on the porch, the silver comb heavy in her pocket, her fingers brushing it like a talisman. She didn't flinch when Ruth's gaze found her. For a long moment, two women held the distance between them, a history of scars and defiance written in silence. "You should have stayed gone," Ruth called, her voice carrying sharp over the yard. "Now I'll cut you down in front of him so he knows what kind of trash he's taken in." Clara didn't answer. The urge to speak rose, but she held it down. Words wouldn't serve her here. Presence would. She squared her shoulders, chin lifted, letting the light of dawn strike her face where once she would have hidden. Eli stepped forward, rifle leveled. His voice was low, steady, the kind that came from a man who had faced storms without blinking. "Turn back. You step further, and you won't leave standing." Ruth laughed a brittle sound. "One man and a broken woman against 10. She swept her hand toward her riders. "We'll burn this place to the ground." Eli's eyes narrowed. "Then you'll burn with it." The standoff stretched, the air itself holding breath. Hooves stamped metal clinked. Bo growled from the porch. Clara's pulse raced, but her body stood still. She remembered every time Ruth had cut her down with words, with fists, with humiliation. The difference now was simple. She was no longer alone, and she no longer bent. One of the riders broke first, nudging his horse forward. Eli fired. The crack tore across the plains, the man toppled from his saddle, the horse shrieking as it bolted. Chaos rippled through the line. Ruth shouted orders, but the men faltered, hesitated. The rancher's aim was legend in these parts, and they'd just had proof of it. "Pull him back," someone yelled. Horses shifted, restless. Another rider raised his rifle, but Clara's voice rang out sharp, cutting through the noise. "Don't!" The single word froze them, as if her defiance itself carried weight. They looked at her, not at Ruth, not at Eli, but at the woman they'd once helped drag through the dirt. Her face was bruised still, her hair shorn, but her eyes blazed with something harder than iron. Ruth spat at the ground, shut her mouth. But no one moved. Clara took a step forward off the porch and into the mud. Her boots sank, but she didn't stop. Her voice rose, each word measured, each syllable anchored. "You've watched her cut me down. You've laughed when she stripped me, when she blackened my face. You've carried her cruelty for her. And for what? To be her dogs. To be remembered as men who whipped women instead of standing on your own 2 feet." A murmur rippled among them. One rider lowered his rifle. Another shifted in the saddle, shame flickering across his face. Eli stood ready, but he didn't fire again. He let Clara's words work. Ruth snarled fury, sharpening her voice. "You'll regret every syllable, girl. I'll carve silence back into you." She urged her horse forward, but Eli's rifle followed her chest. The steel click of him setting his aim was louder than any threat. "Try it," he said simply. The world balanced on a knife edge. Then slowly, one rider turned his horse away. Another followed. The line frayed men peeling back, unwilling to bleed for Ruth's rage. Soon only 3 remained, loyal eyes darting, hands tense on reins. Ruth's fury curdled into something almost feral. "Cowards, all of you." She screamed, but her words fell on backs retreating into the horizon. Clara stood taller still, the mud sucking at her boots, but not at her resolve. Her voice was quiet this time, meant only for Ruth. "You don't own me anymore." The whip of dawnlight caught her face, then unhidden, unashamed. For the first time in years, Clara felt whole, even with scars that still ached. Ruth's eyes narrowed to slits. "This ain't over," she spat, jerking her horse around. "I'll be back." Her threat trailed behind her as she galloped away with the last of her loyal men, dust rising in her wake. Eli lowered his rifle but didn't relax. Clara exhaled a sound somewhere between relief and defiance. She turned to him, her eyes wet but fierce. "We've begun," she said. And he nodded. "And we'll finish." The yard smelled of gunpowder and churned mud, but beneath it was something else, something like freedom, fragile but alive. The cabin settled into uneasy quiet once the riders vanished, but it wasn't peace. It was the stillness before thunder rolled back again. Clara lingered by the porch rail, her chest heaving, her hand pressed against the pocket where the silver comb rested. The dawn had not yet burned away the chill, but the fire inside her burned hot enough to hold her steady. Eli came to stand beside her, scanning the horizon with eyes sharp as an eagle's. His rifle rested loose in his hand, but his body was coiled ready. "They'll come again," he said, voice low. "Not tomorrow, maybe, but soon." "She's too proud to leave this unfinished." Clara nodded, her jaw tight. "Then we don't wait for her shadow to fall. We decide the ground where it ends." Her words surprised even herself, but Eli's glance carried no disbelief, only approval. He saw in her not the broken woman Ruth had carved, but someone tempered, hardened, forged new. They worked the day with an intensity that left no room for fear. Clara patched the window Ruth's riders had cracked, in their first siege, hammering nails with a force that echoed across the yard. Eli strengthened the barn doors, drove spikes into the earth, and set snares along the fence line. The smell of sweat and raw pine filled the air. At noon they paused just long enough for bread and coffee. Clara ate standing, her eyes always drifting back to the horizon. Bo circled restless, catching her unease. "Eli," she said at last, her voice carrying weight. "If she comes back with more, if she comes back with fire." He cut her off gently. "Then we stand." "This land doesn't bend easy, Clara. Neither do we." She stared at him, her heart tightening, not with fear, but with something she hadn't felt in years, trust. As the sun dipped, shadows stretched long and lean across the fields. The world seemed to wait. Then, faint but certain, Clara heard the rhythm of hooves again, this time more than before. Dozens. The ground itself seemed to pulse. Her stomach clenched. "She's brought them all." Eli stepped forward, rifle loaded, jaw set. His silhouette was etched against the burning sky, as if carved from the land itself. "Then we show them what a stand looks like." The riders crested the ridge, Ruth at their head again, but she was not alone. She had gathered men from neighboring towns, hired guns, hungry for coin and bitter kin, who had tasted her poison long enough to mistake it for loyalty. The sight of them was a tide of leather and steel. Clara's breath caught, but her resolve did not falter. She stepped down into the yard mud, clinging to her boots. She thought of every night she'd been silenced, every bruise Ruth had left, every strand of hair hacked away. She touched the comb in her pocket one last time. It no longer felt like a relic of shame, it was a reminder of survival. Ruth's voice carried over the noise, venom-laced. "Last chance, Clara, crawl back, beg me in front of him, and I might leave you alive." Clara's voice answered, steady, clear, carried by the wind, "I'll never kneel again." The men shifted uneasily. Some had expected a frightened woman. Instead, they saw someone who met their gaze head-on. Ruth spat rage, twisting her face. She raised her arm high, signaling the charge. But Eli fired first. The shot cracked through dawn's edge, scattering crows into the sky. One rider tumbled from his horse. Another jerked back wounded. The charge faltered chaos, cutting through the lines. Clara hurled stones from her pail, striking a horse's flank, sending it bolting sideways and throwing its rider. Bo lunged at another teeth, sinking deep, dragging a scream into the morning air. Gunfire erupted, the yard filled with smoke and thunder. Clara ducked behind the porch rail, her heart slamming, but she didn't cower. She rose again, shouting, "Stand on your own! Don't die for her spite!" Her words carried even through the crack of rifles. Men hesitated, mid-fire eyes flicking between Ruth and Clara. Some dropped reins, turning their horses back, unwilling to bleed for someone else's hatred. But others pressed forward. Ruth rode in hard, her whip coiled like a snake ready to strike. Her eyes locked on Clara, hungry for one final cut. Eli moved to block her path, but Clara's hand shot out. "She's mine." Her voice was iron. Ruth's laugh was sharp, cruel. "Then come take your beating girl." The yard seemed to shrink, the chaos dimming at its edges. It was no longer about guns or men or even land. It was two women bound by years of cruelty, standing on the thin edge of justice and ruin. Clara stepped forward, no longer hiding her scarred face, no longer ducking under Ruth's shadow. The fight that had haunted her for years had finally arrived, and she would not back down. The yard quaked beneath the clash. Ruth swung down from her saddle in a storm of rage boots, sinking in mud as she stalked toward Clara. The whip cracked through the air, sharp as lightning, slicing the silence between gunfire bursts. Clara didn't flinch. Her body tensed, every scar screaming memory, but she stood. Her hand darted to the whip mid-strike, catching it across her palm. The lash tore her skin, but she held fast, yanking Ruth forward. The older woman stumbled, eyes wide with shock at the strength she hadn't expected. "You don't cut me anymore," Clara said, her voice trembling with power, not fear. Ruth snarled, lunging fists swinging. They collided, mud-splattering hair flying the world, shrinking into raw survival. Clara's fist landed against Ruth's jaw, years of humiliation driving the blow. Ruth staggered but came back with claws dragging scratches down Clara's cheek. Blood mixed with sweat, but Clara pressed on, fueled by fire. No cruelty could kill. The riders watched, caught between shouts and silence. Eli stood ready, rifle aimed, but he didn't interfere. This was Clara's battle, and she had claimed it. Ruth raised the whip again, but Clara stepped in close, too close for it to strike, grappling it from her hand. She snapped it across her knee, the leather breaking like an oath undone. She cast the pieces into the dirt. Ruth froze. Her weapon, her symbol of control, lay broken. Clara's voice cut through the air, raw and sharp. "You tried to bury me. You carved me down to nothing. But look at me now." Her words rang like church bells in the ears of the riders. Shame flared across some faces. A few dismounted, dropping weapons into the mud. Others turned their horses, retreating into the horizon, unwilling to fight a woman who had already won her war. Ruth's fury twisted into desperation. She lunged one last time, a knife flashing from her belt. The blade arced toward Clara's chest, but Eli's shot split the air. The bullet struck true, the knife spinning from Ruth's hand before it ever touched Clara. The older woman fell to her knees, breath-ragged, staring at the dirt as if it had betrayed her. Clara stepped closer, looking down at the woman who had stolen years of her life. She could have spat, curse demanded Ruth's end. Instead, she lifted her chin and spoke with quiet finality. "You don't own me anymore. Not my face, not my body, not my name." Ruth's eyes flickered with something like fear, then emptiness. She slumped the fight, leaving her bones at last. Silence stretched wide, broken only by the wind through the grass. The riders who remained turned away ashamed, disappearing into distance they could never close again. Eli lowered his rifle, his eyes never leaving Clara. She stood tall in the yard, her hair still ragged, her skin streaked with blood and mud, yet her presence was unshakable. The first rays of morning light broke through the clouds, bathing her in gold. It was not a fragile dawn, but a fierce one, declaring survival, declaring freedom. Eli walked forward, his boots slow in the mud. He touched her shoulder, steady. "It's finished." Clara breathed deep, her chest rising with relief and resolve. "No," she whispered. "It's beginning." Together they stood in the yard, scarred by battle, yet marked now by choice, hers, finally hers. The land stretched open around them, vast, untamed waiting. Clara lifted her face to the sky, the sunlight warming scars that no longer defined her but proved her strength. For the first time in years, she felt unbound, and she did not bow again. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories, and if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.